This program is powered by thevirtual.show, making your offline events virtual. Ladies and gentlemen, the host of WEBIT Virtual, Dr. Plamen Russev.
Welcome, wonderful WEBIT community from all over the world. What an amazing meeting today. We have over 9,000 people registered for this event for over 145, I think was the last number, countries. So grateful to all of you spending time with us, and hopefully we will add value back to you as we always strive to. Today we shall be talking about cybersecurity because it is the WEBIT CyberTech Week. We have fantastic guests, and I am here with our special chair of the CyberTech vertical of WEBIT, who I will introduce and who will take the lead as a major part of this event. But before that, allow me to share some thoughts with you. And I will be very brief, I promise. Everyone talks about the new normal. New normal. What about the new normal? How about if the new normal finally becomes the normal that we had to build for many years? Normal based on resilient lifestyle and resilience in general, inclusion. A lifestyle is the most important thing that we need to change. And it was quite an interesting way of changing our lifestyles during the past few months. We always say now BC, but now when we say BC, we mean not before Christ, but before COVID. The old normal, I don't like. I don't like to have a nature being polluted. I don't like to have a lot of animals and species extinct. I don't like people being killed. I don't like restless lifestyles. It was a virus that made us reconsider the new normal, which I believe should be the normal we all go to, and should be the normal we should build together. We, our wonderful WEBIT community from all around the world, and of course, everyone else. Did I say virus? It's a biological virus. Thanks God, AI is not advanced enough. So we merge bio and technology together and have even bigger trouble, but we are heading there. Global organizations report 5 to 10-fold increase of cyber threats and cyber attacks. That includes WHO and many others. 70% of the global organizations consider increasing the investment in cybersecurity in the next few months as a must. That's what's happening. Well, obviously, we must become more resilient and we must become more prepared. And that's what we are going to be talking now. And I cannot think of a better person from our global community of over 900,000 Digirati from all around the world than the person I'm going to present you right now.
Natalia Oropeza is Chief Cybersecurity Officer at Siemens and responsible for all global cybersecurity activities. In her previous leadership roles, Natalia shaped the entire Volkswagen Group as Chief Information Security Officer. Natalia has more than 27 years of experience in the area of information technology, with international experiences in Mexico, USA, and Germany.
Welcome, Natalia. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here, Plamen. Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me here today.
It is my pleasure, Natalia. We already have 8,500 people, and we've been committed to this particular virtual event for quite some time. You and your wonderful team have been working very close with the WEBIT team to make it happen. And definitely the next 1 hour will be full of insights and deep dive You are, as our attendees, I mean, I always say attendees, Natalia, we are used to welcome these 15,000 people live, hug them. And now but we're still connected, right? So virtual viewers and virtual attendees are aware of who you are, being a cybersecurity officer of Siemens, previously working in the Volkswagen Group, and from I believe not long time ago, you have been also taking a new post along with being chief cybersecurity officer of Siemens. You are now also chief inclusion and diversity officer. Am I right?
That's correct. Now I have the honor to lead this topic for Siemens. Yes.
Well, I've been talking about this at the very opening of this particular show, and we keep on talking about this responsible lifestyle, but above all, inclusion and diversity, the key elements of hopefully the new normal, the new great society we're going to be building. But today we talk about cybersecurity. So obviously, it's what happened for everyone. And I would like to hear from you how did this whole crisis and challenging times affected Siemens and your work as chief cybersecurity officer. I've already said about the statistics, but I'm sure you have better statistics than mine. So was Siemens ready?
Well, let me answer this first by saying that the crisis like this, of course, took us by surprise, as I guess many other companies. Nevertheless, I say it took us by surprise with the right processes in place. So first, from a Siemens company perspective, let me tell you that we were able to scale up very, very fast our IT infrastructure so that we could provide remote connection and connectivity to our different employees. Second, you have to realize Siemens was already in an accelerated path to digitalization and automation, and therefore we were more independent from physical presence. Nevertheless, obviously, and of course, we do need physical presence, for instance, in the factories where we produce our products. We also produce solutions, so from that perspective, we were kind of safe. We also had a process, and we enabled very, very fast our global crisis management team, making sure that we monitor the situation all the time. And very important that we managed to align with the governments and the regulations all over the place. And I have to say, until now, we are doing well and we are managing the situation well. This is from the company, from the Siemens company perspective. Now, let me answer your question from the cybersecurity perspective. And to start with, I would focus on 4 main points. First of all, let me tell you that we were already in Siemens involved in a project of migrating the endpoints to the internet. This was a 24-month project, and that project happened in 3 weeks.
Oh, well, that's a that's a quick one.
Yeah, that was a quick one that shows that we can do that, and of course that increases the attack surface of Siemens, basically from one day to another. I mean, even if they were three weeks, but it was for me like one day from another. So what did we do? And the number one thing that we did was to keep in mind that the first priority at that time was to keep the business running. So to maintain the business continuity was our priority number one. So we had to enable a lot of new solutions in a secure way, very, very fast, by doing fast pen testing and yes, taking some risk. Second, it was very important for me to keep a very good monitoring of everything what was happening. You mentioned already the number of attacks and phishing and stuff like this it has been increasing. So we needed to monitor, and therefore we tailored and increased the number of indicators of compromise in our cyber defense center. And our CERT, so our cybersecurity emergency response team, is ready to act immediately. What I have been said until now from the team is we don't see a change in the quality, but in the quantity. But everyone is ready to rock and roll in case it is needed. We are monitoring the situation very closely. As well by blocking, of course, the malicious websites that are emerging because of this need of having more information of the COVID situation and generating a lot of spam and phishing attacks. Also very important, last but not least, creating awareness all over the company of the fact that now we are working different. So we are working from home. So we issue awareness to 380,000 employees and as well the whole world, together with our partners of Charter of Trust, and give some advice on what to do and what not to do in this case of the current situation of this new home office. And now we speed up the introduction of new projects, so-called zero trust projects in the infrastructure. I will go into more details later about it.
You've mentioned home office. Obviously, I see you in your own, I believe, home office now.
It is my home.
And like many people around the world, I don't think that this has ever been played before in the human history. Obviously, like 1/3 of the humankind being in lockdown. It's very interesting. And obviously, it is very important when you provide opportunity for all your employees to work from home, to make sure that this doesn't breach security, this doesn't make a lot of opportunities for people with different perspective on right and wrong to be able to access important information. How do you make sure this works? I know, for example, there were these Zoom bombs where Elon Musk enters a discussion and starts swearing. Of course, that's not him. That's a deep fake. And of course, very, very serious security breaches. How do you deal with this? How do you make sure your employees are providing secure connection?
Well, this is a tricky question because now I am myself being part of the accepted exceptions in Siemens. So specifically about Zoom, I mean, you are right, we cannot avoid the use of these kind of applications like Zoom. So we made very quick an analysis of the risks that we have by using Zoom. In fact, the risks are relevant for the protection of data, of personal data. So the first thing to do was to make ourselves an opinion, and then later on to make awareness in the company of why do we consider that to be risky. And to issue as well some recommendations on how to use Zoom as secure as possible. In other words, how to mitigate as much risk as possible. So we issue very clear and very easy recommendations like, number one, it has to be an exceptional case where either the customers or the stakeholders, the main one, are requesting Zoom to be used. Number two, make sure that we don't exchange any confidential information. Number three, use by preference the dial-in connection, use the mobile app connection. If possible, join using a browser.
So mobile connection is more secure than the browser?
Yeah, it's more secure than installing a client, okay? And if a client is needed, then please make sure that you are using the latest version, meaning 5.x or something above. And of course, those recommendations are helping to mitigate the risk that we have of using Zoom. And of course, we are We wanted to protect our employees and their data privacy. And we are watching and monitoring the developments of Zoom carefully. So we're expecting them to fix what they have to fix. And this is not a specifically recommendation just for Zoom, but in general, our employees are requested to install secure software only. And this is especially helping in the situation that we have.
It's indeed needed, isn't it? And definitely, together with our partners from the virtual show, we are also building now the platform that is providing more secure connection. Because I mean, imagine while we do this live, if there are these deep fakes coming in and doing all these bad things, starting from there, and of course losing the security levers and layers, which obviously is a fact, and we've seen a lot of troubles in that area. That's a serious challenge. Well, Natalia, we have some great guests, and I would like to invite them further, but I have so many questions for you, coming also from social media, and etc., etc. So, what is your expectation? Do you foresee any, and what kind? There will be most probably changes in the security protocols, in the security regulations, in the way companies behave in the future. How do you foresee the next couple of years?
Well, you know, I am with you on your introduction. Everyone talks about going back to normal, but I personally don't want to go back to normal. I think the development and the opportunities that we have seen during this crisis situation are there for us to use properly. So specifically, I foreseen an increment use of remote connection and virtual connections. Home office is now not going to be the exception anymore, but the rule. And the exception is going to be code back to the office. I really hope. And therefore, that will change the whole landscape of the IT infrastructure. And and it has changed already. I am still talking in the future, but we have been traveling in an expressway to the future because of COVID. And to go back to answering your question is, I foresee a big change in the way that the infrastructure setup is, and therefore, of course, we have to adapt the protection, or in other words, the cybersecurity that we need to provide to protect data. We have the expert today, in fact, so I am not going to answer that much, because Bruce will, and I am really excited to hear what he has to say about this topic. But nevertheless, I will talk about what we are at Siemens doing, and we are now making a fast introduction of Zero Trust architecture. One of the base for Zero Trust is never trust, always verify. And we are focusing on protecting the devices, whatever devices we use, whether this is a laptop or a phone, whatever. We have to protect them. We have to protect the identities. We have to protect the access. We have to protect the applications that we use, and we have to protect, of course, the data. So
Zero trust sounds to me very German, Natalia. brutally honest. Yeah. Zero trust. We go there and that's it. But I believe in cybersecurity, that's what is needed. You've already mentioned the name Bruce, and I'm sure that our viewers already know who is he. The Economist called him the cybersecurity guru, but here is his business card, and let's welcome him to our studio.
Bruce Schneier is a chief of security architecture at Inrupt. He is an internationally renowned security technologist called a security guru by The Economist. He is the New York Times best-selling author of 14 books.
Bruce, welcome. together with Natalia, welcome you to our studio. And I would like to leave you, the two of you together, because when the experts speak, we, the amateurs, should be only supporting you on the way. That's what WEBIT's mission is, to support the brightest, the most beautiful minds in the world to collaboratively create the desirable future. So, Natalia, I'm leaving it up to you. Bruce, I'm so honored to have you with us, and looking forward to your fantastic discussion. And with your allowance, I will be joining you from time to time.
Thanks, Plamen. Thanks for leaving that to me. It is for me an honor, and I am thankful to have you here, Bruce. And I am really excited to be the one making the questions to you this time, Bruce. So I will start with a simple question, and maybe you can tell us, how did COVID-19 affect your daily routine and your work?
You know, for me, my work involves a lot of travel. So I'm not traveling anymore. And that is probably the biggest difference. I travel a lot, and being in the same place for it is now going on 11 weeks is unheard of in my adult life, and that is by far the biggest change. And of course, there's a lot going on. It's harder to concentrate. It's harder to do anything, and that's something we're all experiencing. But for me, it really is travel. Okay.
So I go to the next question, and you have this wonderful book, Click Here to Kill Everybody. And of course, a lot of your...
This is it.
Yeah, a great book, really. And of course, you have a lot of speeches, and in those speeches, you have been warning every one of us about the rising threats from digitalization. In the same way, reminding us of what this interconnection that we have now in the IoT, reminding us as Bill Gates did as well about the coming pandemic. And now I am very much willing to hear from you. What is it that we can learn from this crisis in this context of cyber threats that we are facing?
You know, I think there are two main lessons we're teaching everybody. And the first is the easy one, to understand exponential growth. If people knew a little bit more math, we'd have a lot better time with this crisis. And the second is the value of redundancy. We live in an economic system where pretty much all redundancy is leached out in the name of profit. And that only works when things are going perfectly. And if we want to have a system that is robust, that is resilient against all sorts of threats, redundancy is essential. And that costs money, and it doesn't pay in normal times. It is an insurance for crisis times. But I think something we can learn in IT, that the whole world is learning about everything, about our food supply, about our cities, about our government, that the value of redundancy, that redundancy isn't inefficient, that redundancy is security. And that's probably the most important lesson.
Okay. Now, regarding the threats, anything that we should pay special attention? I mentioned before, we are monitoring the phishing, the malware, the rising, that I was always wondering, every day I am wondering whether it's another thing that we should pay attention of.
You know this, it's nothing's different. It's just that the world's worse. I mean, so what's changed?
Okay.
People are working from home. They're using unfamiliar tools on computers that you don't control, doing things not normally, which means they're more vulnerable to changes that are insecure. I mean, this is really what we're used to, but it's just all happening at once. The attacks aren't different, the threats aren't different, the vulnerabilities aren't different. It's just that everything is different around them, and that's what makes the difference. So no, I think you're worrying about the right things. I think you're probably too concerned about Zoom. I think Zoom is probably one of the best right now, given the work they've done. And while I wouldn't have a UK cabinet meeting on Zoom, I would do pretty much anything else on the platform right now.
Okay.
But we're all just making do. We're doing the best we can given the situation we're in, giving the resources we have, trying to get the job done.
Okay.
And that's important. There are risks, and we take them.
Okay, nice to hear that from you, Bruce. Thanks a lot. And then I go with Tom. And Tom, thanks for joining. A pleasure having you here in the panel. A pleasure as well to be the one doing some
Natalia, if you allow me, let's play Tom's business card so that everyone knows who our guest is here with us.
Absolutely, sorry.
Here is Tom's business card.
Tom Korn is the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Security Products at VMware Carbon Black. He previously served as the Chief Strategy Officer of RSA Security, overseeing corporate strategy, M&A, alliances, advanced development, and the CTO office.
The first question, which is, I mentioned before that we enact our crisis management process immediately, and I know that VMware has its own. This is called VMware Contagious Illness Response Plan. And the first question is whether you inactivate that, or if it was placed before the pandemic, and if so, did you adjust that? Can you maybe comment on that?
I mean, there were a lot of the elements of that candidly were really things that we were trying to accelerate in normal times. We have an enormous remote workforce to begin with, particularly in my area in security. I think this is pretty normal, particularly in areas like threat research, that we've had to deal with a very large sort of work from home workforce. In fact, I think we had something like a third of our development team working remote even before the pandemic. So some of these elements were, candidly, perhaps an acceleration to Bruce's comment, but sort of a lot of sort of business as normal. There were a lot of elements, of course, that were very specific to the pandemic. The teams that had to get put in place on how we're tracking individuals, how we were dealing with the cleanliness of offices, the orderly shutdown of offices. Now they're very, very heavily involved with how do we, in a staged and safe manner, begin to reopen facilities. And we're taking this cautiously. We're actually going to be encouraging a lot of work from home. We're not forcing people to immediately sort of return to offices as we reopen. We're doing it in a very sort of staged and methodical manner. But look, candidly, the business we're in around mobility, around virtualization, virtual desktops, I suppose we're fortunate to be at a business where a lot of the tools to enable a lot of this remote workforce is a lot of our bread and butter, and so perhaps we were in a good state to take advantage of it ourselves.
Okay, thank you for that, Tom. Now I go back to you, Bruce, on the question that I didn't quite answer before from Plamen, and ask you what kind of major changes do you foresee in the architecture of the internet in the coming years, and how are we going to organize to have a secured, web experience?
Well, I mean, I think we've got a secure web experience right now. So, I mean, the surprising thing about the internet is how well it's held up. We're doing everything on Zoom or other video platforms, lots more streaming, lots more people using a lot of bandwidth, and we're doing remarkably well. I think there's a huge success story here we should acknowledge. So, I don't see a lot of changes. I'm hoping for more distributed systems. I mean, getting back to this notion of redundancy, that if we can start distributing our systems more, we will have a more secure, reliable, robust, available internet. And there are moves towards that. But other than that, it looks like the powerful are getting more powerful, and the entrenched are getting more entrenched. Okay. So, this is a singular time. I mean, I think this is a huge change in society that we really can't even begin to comprehend right now, because we're in the early stages of it. And what's going to change in 3 to 5 years, I don't think anyone has any idea. It could go in a lot of different directions.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, I am going to be very specific about that something that is coming, and in these tracing apps for COVID-19. They are now being promoted and deployed by the different governments and companies. What kind of risk do you see in the deployment of those kind of solutions?
I'm not convinced they're being deployed by companies and governments. They're being talked about a lot. There are pilots a lot, but not a lot being done. Singapore pulled theirs. I'm not sure Israel is really using theirs anymore. In terms of security risks, I think there are probably none additional. Right? This is already a device that tracks us, and we're just adding another tracking feature onto this. I mean, kind of so what? My main concern, and I think why they're not being used, is they actually don't do any good. That the false positives and the false negatives are so great that they're not really useful. We know how to do good contact tracing. It involves people. It's manual. It's annoying. Nobody likes it. This isn't a place where apps can save us, especially in the US, where we don't have ubiquitous, cheap, fast, accurate testing. And that's the most important thing. So, I mean, apps have been sold. Yes, lots of talking, not a lot of doing, and that's probably for the best.
Okay, so you don't see any violations of the personal data protection laws around the world, or any way around, maybe those regulations stopping the apps?
And to add, Natalia, if I may, also to both of you, Bruce, and to three of you, actually. I mean, Bruce said, okay, we are tracked anyway. Is this the normal? I mean, just one more app, etc. I mean, what's next?
So yes, it's the normal, right? There are probably hundreds of apps on your phone tracking you. Now there's 101. This is not new. Right? Google already knows where you live, where you work, when you wake up, when you go to sleep, who you sleep with. I mean, this is normal.
Yeah, I'm monogamous, so the whole world knows. My wife, right?
Well, but if you're not, and your wife doesn't know, Google knows. That's the thing of it. I mean, yeah, it's fun when we're all public, but lots of people do things that they don't want the whole world to know. And to have a for-profit corporation know it is a little bit jarring. So, I mean, yes, the COVID tracing apps is another database of location and proximity being used for another purpose. There's a much bigger question about all of this data and how it's being used. So we're in extraordinary time. If those apps worked, I think we can make an easy case for using them because we want to know who's been in contact with whom. But really the problem is not the privacy, but the efficacy. In order to have any privacy trade-off, we need something that works.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Now I go to you, Tom, and a very interesting question on, I know that the VMware has this carbon black threat analysis Unity TAU. And what the unit is doing is using big data analytics to keep pace on the attackers. And I understand there is even a hope to be able to predict unknown attacks, which is a dream for people like me, persons like me. So can you tell me if this is a dream or this realistic? Can you comment on that one?
I think there's always been a growth in the security field around threat analytics and threat research. I think there's actually two elements of it where I think there's a lot of big potential gains. One of them is decidedly not very sexy, which is cyber hygiene. I mean, there's actually still enormous headways that we can make that don't really have to do with predicting how the next attack will occur, but actually how we can better understand our critical applications and data, how our infrastructure supports those critical applications and data, and how we can use that knowledge to start getting rid of enormous amount of attack surface. And advanced analytics like AI, machine learning, et cetera, can all be applied to those problems equally well. I think there's enormous opportunity on that side of the equation. It's I would argue that while cyber is always an asymmetric battle, meaning that defense is always harder than offense, The one area where we have advantage is in understanding how we use our own home or our own company or our own assets. That's something that an attacker has to learn, and we have an asymmetric advantage over that. So, there's been a lot of research actually outside of that threat team and using more advanced technologies to really start digging into the problem of how do we better understand our own applications, our own data, our own infrastructure, and use that to shrink the attack surface. I think in the questions of starting to get ahead of attacks, I think the kinds of attacks that we see more and more and bigger concern that really weren't very well addressed by traditional approaches is as we've moved increasingly into the realm of fileless and non-malware attacks, where it's, I would argue that the analogy is something like we're no longer trying to find bombs, we're trying to find vans that are being driven into crowds. And that's actually a slightly different security problem. Whereas I would argue our traditional security technologies and analytics and threat research were, how do I identify a bomb? Oh, this is a new type of bomb. This is a variation on the bomb. But when you start to move to the latter, then it's not about finding a van. It's about understanding how a van is being used and who's using the van and how they're using the van and how fast are they going and when did they rent it. And so it's forcing us to really increasingly explore behavioral analytics and applying a lot more technology around that front.
Wow, that's really amazing. I mean, whatever we can learn and whatever step we can move forward into trying to understand that better, that will help us tremendously. Thank you. Now, yeah, I asked you about this threat tracing apps, but nevertheless, in the current COVID situation, we have heard and read in the newspapers that especially hospitals were attacked, and even during this crisis, humanitarian crisis, they were hardly attacks on and hijacking the information, and the attackers asking for money. And of course, during this crisis situation, the hospitals cannot afford to stop the operation. So can you comment on that perspective of health care threats, Bruce?
This is not new. There have been stories in the papers for years about ransomware against hospitals, right? Ransomware is a common attack tool. And my guess is that hospitals are not targeted, that hospitals tend to make their attacks public, that that corporations are attacked just as often. It just doesn't make the press, so we don't know about it. But hospitals tend to make the press, and over the years we've, in the U.S. there's a steady stream of articles of hospitals that have been affected by ransomware, either pay or they don't pay. So now it's COVID, and the same thing is happening. I bet it's not happening more. I bet it's not, the effects maybe are greater because the hospitals are operating at full capacity. But I think this is just business as usual on the internet, and something that unfortunately is part of normal. So yes, it's happening. I don't think there's a COVID story at all.
Okay. So, then I take COVID away, but you recently wrote about making America's health infrastructure safe requires a fundamental reorientation of cybersecurity away from offense and towards defense. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is then your thoughts and about that?
In that, I'm really pushing back against the continuing efforts by the U.S. and other governments to put backdoors into the system. That in the U.S. it's the FBI, it's now an iPhone. That they want this to be insecure so they can get at criminal information. And the problem, of course, is that this is national security technology. It's held by every lawmaker, every government official, every CEO, every judge, every police officer, every election official, and every health worker in a hospital has one of these. So, when I talk about moving towards a defense-dominant posture, it's recognizing that consumer tech is national security tech, and that we have to make it as secure as possible, that we cannot build vulnerabilities into it for offensive purposes, simply because the risk is too great, because the insecurity is too dangerous, and we can't afford that anymore.
We all remember the connected cameras and the exploits that followed after this. So we all hear you, Bruce, and I hope that also the regulators, a lot of our community members are representative of policymakers, regulators, etc. So they will hear. Here, I would like, in the last third of this show, of this program, I would like to invite someone who represents the power of opinion and who is also a professional in everything technology, because people trust him and people follow him and hear who he is.
Rob Pegoraro is a columnist at USA Today and a contributing writer at Yahoo Tech Finance. He writes about computers, gadgets, telecom, social media, apps, and other things that beep or blink. He has met most of the founders of the internet and once even received an email reply from Steve Jobs.
Rob, welcome to the studio.
Hello.
We are all together now, and we have the last third of the show getting even more interesting. We already had above 10,000 people looking at this, being with us at this show. So you heard obviously the discussions until now. Nobody is surprised by the big elephant in the shop. The question is where we are heading next. And we already said we're not going to be talking too much about COVID, but still it was kind of a catalyst. And obviously it gives us a lot of food for thought. So maybe with your participation, we shall be having another great point of view, both representing your journalistic instinct and need for information, and at the same time representing the audience with their questions. So Rob, please join the discussion and feel free to address questions to our fantastic panel.
Absolutely. So I look at this, the way I like to talk about security is we've spent a lot of time realizing what we didn't know. And I would look at myself. You can look up the review I wrote of Windows XP almost 20 years ago, in which the word security doesn't appear. Now let's fast forward to Zoom. 2 years ago, that application, which we're using right now, had an awful security record. And that application and that company have had to grow up very fast. They fixed a lot of problems. They've brought on people who really know their stuff. Alex Stamos, the former chief security officer of Facebook. Katie Masuris, one of the best security researchers I know. Leah Kistner, one of the former Google privacy professional, to say, what are we doing wrong? How can we do this better? And so what you've seen, if you've kept installing your updates to Zoom, is a much better and more secure application that fixes a lot of the problems that were there, that shows this company is doing what we call red teaming, figuring out how can things go wrong. What are we missing? If somebody wanted to try to make life miserable for people on our platform, what would they do? And companies that do that, that spend the time to think about really unpleasant scenarios, have better odds of not subjecting their customers, their users, to those scenarios.
Thank you, Rob. And I will leave it now to you and to Natalia to squeeze more information as much as possible to what's next.
Yeah, I will say that the question goes for everyone. What's next? I mean, what should be prepared for from the cybersecurity perspective, with what we have learned from the past crisis, and what is it that yeah, I mean, what we have seen things happening that we didn't believe before. So what should be our preparation from the cybersecurity perspective? And that question goes back to anyone in the round that wants to answer that.
Well,
Maybe Bruce.
I would start by noting that in some ways we've been conducting a worst case experiment. we decided to send a huge chunk of the technical professionals in the world out of their offices to their homes using computers, endpoints that may not be trusted, with very little preparation or training, and said, go work remotely. Figure it out. Good luck. We're going to meet on this. Do you have a Zoom account? You better have one now. And you would think that that much disruption, chaos, and confusion would have opened the way for a lot more bad things to happen. And maybe they have, we haven't heard about them, or, you know, in one respect, all this has not been as bad as it could have been.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, security, cyber, and in fact, even before that, just in defense of nations, has always been periods of time where the battle lines change. And there's a period of time where everyone scrambles to figure out how to align your defenses to the new battle line, right? And your efficacy, your ability to deal with the threat, has so much to do with how those things are aligned. There's an interesting statistic, I think, from Gartner that something like 90% of breaches leverage misconfiguration and misalignment of controls, and I think that speaks to that. I think one of the challenges we saw here were exactly that. I agree with Bruce. It's a lot of the same problems, a lot of the same issues, but what scrambles is some of the battle lines change. And there's a pendulum, I think, in security between sort of network and endpoint and server, and candidly a lack of thinking of it in ways more holistic. And I think one of the things that caught people flat-footed in this change is suddenly a lot of the investment in some of the network monitoring pieces inside people's data centers and inside the campuses suddenly weren't particularly useful when such a dominant portion of their workforce is actually not traveling through that. Their own personal networks, they're on, maybe their visibility was limited to antivirus. Maybe it was less than that because it was some home machine. And I think people have, there's been a lot of scrambling to say, how do we reorient our controls and our visibility so that we have that control on the new battle line. So how do we have visibility on these tools? How do we harden these tools? This problem isn't solved with simply an old style next gen antivirus. All the fundamentals of security still apply, and we just need to start applying it to the new battleground.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I want to add something to what you said, and that was mentioned before by Bruce as well. He meant this redundancy, and I know that you guys have also some capabilities of disaster recovery. Do you think that do you see any change in the request of disaster recovery? I think I haven't heard that for a while. In my day-to-day working life, I used to hear that a lot. So I was wondering if you can comment on that, whether you see more awareness into be prepared for the worst case scenario, which is, yes, we did have an attack and the availability of our systems has been compromised, and now we need to go and start from crash as soon as possible, as quick as possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. A lot of our solution design and reference architecture design now is all labeled under the banner of business continuity, right? I do think in general, as we've moved to the mobility and cloud, both of these have very unique properties outside of security. These have very unique properties that I think as a society we're figuring out how can we leverage these new properties. The laws of gravity are different, right? It's the scalability, the agility, the automatability compared to sort of physical infrastructure. Ironically, I think in the areas like security, up until recently, there's been very little thought about how can we leverage those properties for security, as opposed to, gee, that's just one more surface to secure. Let's bring our same way we did it, and let's just treat that as a new attack surface, a new operating system. I think the opportunity is to think about how we leverage some of these properties to change how we think about security. So clearly, some of that has to do with, I think there are far more economic and operationally feasible ways of doing redundancy in this new world. We can think about how we use the dynamics and that redundancy to make the attack surface harder to maintain a position of an attacker, right? We see a lot, our whole virtual desktop business has been skyrocketing recently because it's a much easier way of sort of containing that. You also have the ability to shred the machine at the end of the session and you start with a brand new one. That's a way of using the concept of redundancy to a different effect, right? Of just making it harder for an attacker to maintain position. So I do think it goes back to some of these concepts, but I would urge us to think of it more broadly than just, you know, how can we back up and then restore from where we are. I think there's an opportunity to really leverage the properties of the cloud and of mobility to change our approaches to security.
Okay, thank you for that perspective, Tom. I go back to you, Bruce, and I ask you another kind of question, and that was triggered when I heard The Economist. Do you think the spending for cybersecurity from the companies, and we have seen this arising in the last, growing in the last years, still the question whether this is the right spending now, or do the companies have to increase their spending? And if yes, where should they focus in general? And I am talking about cybersecurity.
Really hard to know the answer to that question. There's a lot packed into knowing that. My guess is, and it really is a guess, that companies are spending about the right amount. They're just spending it really, really badly. So it's not a matter of spending more. It's a matter of figuring out what to spend it on. I like solutions that sort of push the security out of the companies, that security is, in a sense, a utility, and moving into the cloud, moving into service providers, I think gives companies a lot more security for their value and doesn't make it a separate thing. Now, when I go and use Gmail, I don't buy security separately. It comes with Gmail. And that means Google as an aggregator can do a lot that I couldn't do myself. And that's true for pretty much all services. I mean, it's a personal one, but you go to larger corporate services as well. So I don't see spending increasing in the absence of real regulation. Remember, the goal for companies is to have as little security they can absolutely possibly get away with. We learned that with Zoom. A year ago, they could get away with a lot less security than they can today. And today they're spending it because they have to, not because they want to, not because it's a good idea, because they have no other choice. And that's true for everyone. If you want to increase spending, you have to increase regulation to force it. But my guess,
Natalia and Bruce, if you allow me, I think that Rob has tons of questions from the audience, and since we have only 7 minutes left, Rob, would you please wrap up some of the questions? And I would request as quick as possible answers, because we would like to answer as many as possible.
So this is a great one, and one I'm happy to answer every time. It's from Alberto Fernandez in Belgium. What can we do to protect ourselves in our day-to-day work life? And I'll give you, it's a three-part answer. One of these things is really easy. The other one is maybe not so easy, but still not that bad. The third one is a little bit of work. Step one, install your security updates. You have to trust Apple and Microsoft and Google. You're not going to outsmart them. When you get that security patch on your MacBook, your iPad, your iPhone, your Android phone, your Windows laptop, install it. That is one of the best ways you can do to keep current. And if you don't, bad things happen. Here in the Washington, D.C. area, we saw one school system. They tried to do remote learning on a system called Blackboard, which some people like it, some people don't. It definitely won't work if you miss the last 9 or so rounds of security updates, as this school system did. They're not using that anymore. Step two is don't reuse passwords. And I know everyone hates remembering passwords. If you reuse one, you're going to get in trouble when, not if, one of the sites you use the same password at gets compromised. Odds are one of these sites won't secure their password securely. Your password will then wind up in databases people use to break into accounts. How do you remember complex passwords? The third part of this is use a password manager. And that should be a service like LastPass or 1Password or Dashlane that'll securely store your passwords in a way that the service can't look at them. There's no key, only you have it. But even if you just write them down, one of the best things Bruce has ever written, it was a piece in defense of writing down your passwords on a piece of paper you put in your wallet, where you already know how to keep pieces of paper secure. That way you can have a bunch of complex passwords that aren't the same. And the last bit is two-step verification, which is when the site thinks your login is a little weird, Google sees you're trying to connect from Russia when you haven't been there before, they'll ask you to verify it with a code sent to your phone, something you type in, and that ensures that even the loss of your password doesn't mean your most important accounts get compromised. Those three things will do a lot, far more than worrying about movie theater plots involving people breaking into your house, or all these other things you're told, like change your passwords every 90 days. That's horrible advice. Don't do that. So that's one
Thank you,
question
Rob.
we got.
Let's move to the next question and let's get involved in the answers, the rest of the participants, please.
Yes, this is a good one. It's about society in general. It is from Synchronicity, I think. There wasn't a country listed. Will the US elections in 2020 this year be more or less secure than they were in 2016? And there's a lot of different ways we can unpack that. I'd like to get Tom and Bruce in on that.
I'll go first. Less.
That was a short answer. Thank you. What about the others, Natalia? And
Offer answer. We have a second round of this panel, Plamen. Yeah, I think less. Yes, because the complexity is bigger.
And I'm Canadian. They don't let me vote anyway. So
it's always good to have a cybersecurity panel that ends up with smiles, you know? Normally you expect something, oh gosh, it's there everywhere, the matrix. And there we go, it's fine. All right, Rob, may I ask you for other questions? This one was good and short answer. Thank you all. 3 minutes left.
Another synchronous story. Sorry, I got this person's name wrong. How much of a threat does a company like Amazon represent to our security given their voracious and exponential global reach? Controversial stuff. Well, where do we start with that?
I'll start, I think, pretty big. They're a monopoly. Monopolies are bad. Monopolies have a lot of adverse consequences to our safety, our security, our systems.
And you did start out at the top talking about, optimizing for efficiency endlessly leaves us with brittle systems for making things and distributing them. And Amazon is certainly trying to optimize everything for its efficiency. Tom.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is and maybe this is a point that Bruce was raising earlier. It's not just the volume of information, it's how different sets of information that can be combined together to glean other context. And I think anytime you have such a massive conglomerate of information, I think this goes beyond a cyber issue though, candidly. I mean, what is the appropriate use and governance of data and multiple data sets that we combine together? And I don't think Amazon is alone in that. From a pure cyber perspective, I think they probably have more sophisticated sort of cyber mechanisms in place than most organizations do. I think it's really more a factor of the data set.
I go with Tom and add to that they have better chances to have better security, not only because they have the knowledge and the capacity, but also because they have a bigger standardization in the systems, and to apply certain needed security measures are much easier to do for them.
So this is the biggest risk. We're not worried about Amazon securing against other threats. We're about the threat of Amazon.
Yeah.
Right? Amazon as the attacker, Amazon as the bad guy, and they're perfectly positioned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but we're not in this theory of finding enemies, but actually defining opportunities for collaborative efforts to create this desirable future, all of us. But as we all know, it's only the paranoids that survive. And I'm sure that in this community here that we represent, there are a lot of pronoics, not paranoids, pronoics who believe in the in the good conspiracy for the good of the humankind. I would love to go for hours with you, ladies and gentlemen, but we have to wrap up. Actually, we are already overdue, and I would like to thank all of you. Obviously, first and foremost, the chair of the CyberTech and the host together with me, Natalia. Natalia, thank you so much. Really appreciate your commitments. And I would love to spend the last minute together to wrap up and to hear your thoughts on this discussion. Before that, together to say thank you to Rob, to Bruce, and obviously to Tom. Thank you all for being with us.
Thank you, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Well, Natalia, what is your takeaway from this discussion?
Well,
where do you think that we touched the hottest issues, and do you think we've missed something?
no, I think we made it clear, and I will close with saying I used to say that we will not survive the next 10 years if we don't take cybersecurity serious. I will change my statement after this virtual panel discussion today, and I will say we will not survive the coming 18 months if we don't take cybersecurity serious. I hope with that I summarize what I think we learned from this discussion.
Well, I would say that I already have boobs here, and 19 months, that's not a lot. And I'm hopeful that we all will know what to do. I keep on receiving and participating in invitations and participating in calls with a lot of people, with a lot of genuinely good forces, with which we try to build new alliances, to find new opportunities to work together. And definitely, I believe that in that particular area, CyberTech is and cybersecurity is key to our well-being in the future. I started with this allegory. Look what a old-time biological virus did to us, locked us down for 3 months. I can only imagine what could happen if a biotech virus takes over the world. What will be next? Are we prepared? How can we get out of this and make sure it never happens, or it happens in a controlled way? There are so many things to discuss in the future. Natalia, thank you so much for being part of our family and doing what you're doing. And I look forward to our next panel and in the next CyberTech week at WEBIT Virtual. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And at the end of this, I would like to introduce tomorrow's program, because it's equally exciting, and you will hear and see some fantastic participants. Here in that studio, we have the leading media forum on CyberTech, participants from Euronews, from USA Today, from Forbes, and from CNN, all together tomorrow with me, their point of view and how CyberTech is challenging and changing, and obviously giving opportunities to our lives. Thank you so much for being with us for another WEBIT Virtual episode as part of the CyberTech Week. See you tomorrow. Thank you.
This program is powered by thevirtual.show, making your offline events virtual.